people walk all over days like this, swarming with people. Yeah. Not one of them might see timber rattlesnakes. I saw a little finger once. November, you can barely move.
All right, it's about that time. Welcome, everyone. It is so wonderful to have you all here joining us this evening for our first autumn lecture series program in our beautiful brand new amphitheater. So thank you so much and welcome. And we are thrilled that Dr. Thomas Leduc is joining us today to present rattlesnake conservation in Pennsylvania. And we're Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. My name is Jamie Dawson. I'm the Director of Education. So Hawk Mountain, of course, we love our raptors. We also love our monarchs. It's Monarch Day today, but we also love our snakes and our rattlesnakes, such an important part of the ecosystem. So we're really looking forward to your presentation. Did anyone here go hiking earlier today? Yes. Awesome. Maybe you're still like have some of that heat from your hike to keep you warm right now. So want to say a thank you to all of our members. We are a private nonprofit, as you may know, so we could not do what we do without our members, so thank you so much. And if you're not a member, we hope you consider becoming one in the future. So Hawk Mountain, we work so hard to conserve raptors worldwide, to study raptors and educate people about raptors here in Pennsylvania, the United States, and all over the world. So thank you for being a part of that and supporting that by being here today. And we're also very proud to be the world's very first sanctuary for birds of prey, founded in 1934 with the world's longest running raptor migration count. But you know what? We're here tonight to talk about rattlesnakes. So I'd love to take a moment to share some of Dr. Leduc's background with the audience before we get started. Dr. Thomas Leduc is a professor of biological sciences at East Stroudsburg University, where he has worked for the past 27 years teaching herpetology, tropical ecosystems, comparative vertebrate anatomy, and field zoology. He earned his PhD from the City University of New York in 1991, an MS from Michigan State University in 1983, and his BS was also from Michigan State in 1981. He has had a lifelong passion for herpetology, vertebrate paleontology, and tropical biology, and has conducted studies in all of those areas. His master's thesis and dissertation topic pertain to the study of fossil snakes and snake skeletal anatomy. He has been a founding member of several nonprofit organizations, including the Mid-Atlantic Center for Herpetology and Conservation and Neighbor Ape, where he serves on the board of directors. Dr. Leduc has been working on timber rattlesnake conservation projects in Pennsylvania for the past 10 years, and we are thrilled to have you here tonight. So thank you, Dr. Leduc.
Well, thank you very much for that very generous introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time out of your schedules to listen a little bit. We talked about the conservation of timber rattlesnakes. And so, as she said, I've been working with timber rattlesnakes in Pennsylvania for a little over 10 years now. As a professor at East Stroudsburg University, I've had a number of graduate students help me with these various studies. And one of the things that we are trying to do is help to establish how many snakes there are, how many timber rattlesnakes there are in Pennsylvania, and what is the best way forward for conserving timber rattlesnakes in such a way that people and wildlife, people in these forms of wildlife can coexist in a favorable way for both. A lot of people in Pennsylvania are very interested in timber rattlesnakes. People find it rather exciting, a little thrilling sometimes to find a timber rattlesnake when they're out on the trail. And so it's a very worthwhile organism, very important in our habitats to other organisms, but for people as well. I think it's a very beneficial thing to have animals like timber rattlesnakes, black bears, and other things that, you know, could be potentially dangerous, but if you are careful, you can enjoy observing them without really running any great risk. And that's very important here at Hawk Mountain, where they have rather large populations of timber rattlesnakes. and lots of people sort of mixing in with the habitats around here. And so one of our objectives in working here at Hawk Mountain is to help find ways that we can sort of blend people and timber rattlesnakes while minimizing the potential negative impacts to both of those groups of creatures. Right? And so I'd like to start off my talk by going over a little bit about the natural history of timber rattlesnakes, especially as it pertains to Pennsylvania. And then toward the end of the talk, we'll talk about some conservation issues, and we'll talk about what's going on with timber rattlesnakes here at Hawk Mountain. Okay. So, there we go. Timber rattlesnakes are usual snakes in a number of ways, so I'd like to go over some of those features with you. They tend to be rather large, heavy-bodied snakes. When you compare them to other snakes, they appear to have a fairly short body, but they can be quite large in size, in diameter, and in mass. And so timber rattlesnakes are really the largest type of snake that you can find in Pennsylvania in terms of their mass, in terms of how much they weigh, but not necessarily the longest snakes that occur here. And so larger reptiles tend not to do as well in cooler northern climates unless they have special adaptations. And as we'll find out, most of the adaptations of timber rattlesnakes for dwelling in northern latitude, where it's relatively cool, are behavioral. So they have behavioral characteristics that allow them to exist in areas like this where you really would not typically expect to find such a large reptile. Other large snakes in Pennsylvania also have their own special adaptations for this kind of habitat. Timber rattlesnakes are viviparous, which means that they give birth to live young, just like mammals do. So when timber rattlesnakes have babies, the babies come out as little baby snakes. They're basically wrapped in a little membrane, but they immediately emerge from that membrane and take up an active life as what we call a neonate. So baby rattlesnakes are called neonates in the same way that baby mammals are called neonates, right? Little baby people are neonatal people. And so we use that term neonate for timber rattlesnakes. And so there are a lot of other snakes that give birth to live young as well, like garter snakes and water snakes. And the proper term for a baby snake of that sort is a neonate. A lot of people who learn that word start to call all baby snakes neonates, but that's not appropriate because some snakes still hatch out of eggs. And so we would call those babies hatchlings, right? So you can have hatchling baby snakes, like ringneck snakes. You can have neonates, snakes that give birth to live young. I apologize that the sun is striking the screen. I think it's a question of timing. It's just an unfortunate nexus here that we are giving our talk right when the sun is going down and hitting the screen. Timber rattlesnakes, just bear with me as best you can. Timber rattlesnakes are also considered social reptiles, which means that among reptiles, they have more behaviors that involve associating with other members of their species. And so they have a tendency to come together for basking and warming up their bodies. Female timber rattlesnakes, when they give birth to young, they tend to stay with their young for a period of time. We believe that they are doing this in order to afford them some protection from potential predators. The young are much more vulnerable than the older snakes. And so there are a number of ways, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail later as we go on. Timber rattlesnakes belong to a group of snakes that are called pit vipers. Pit vipers are unique in that they have special heat-sensitive organs in the sides of their face, between the eye and the nostril, but a little bit lower down. So if you look at the side of a rattlesnake's face, you see the eye, you see the nostril, and below is this extra hole, which is this called pit organ, because it's a little pit in their face. It has a membrane with nerve endings that are sensitive to infrared radiation. So heat that emanates from a warm object can be detected by them. And scientists have seen that the nerves that connect to those heat-sensitive organs go into the brain and integrate into the same areas where the snake's visual centers are. And so it's pretty clear that the snakes use these heat-sensitive organs to produce an image that's kind of similar to what you would see if you were looking through one of these night vision goggles, right? So you get like a monochrome image of something, and you can see pretty clearly the outline. You can see things moving in your in your night vision goggles. But we think that the pit vipers are able to integrate that heat image with their visual image and thereby see things in a slightly different way during the daytime. And at night, when their eyes can't see anything, we know that these heat-sensitive organs can still see the same image that they were seeing as a heat image during the day. So heat-sensitive organs allow timber rattlesnakes to prey on warm-blooded animals at night and to see things in a somewhat different way from most animals do. And here's the pit organ. You can see it in the image right about there on the little timber rattlesnake's face. Unfortunately, the sun is blocking us from that, but maybe we'll come back to that at the end.
Actually, Thomas, I forgot to mention this in the beginning. We are recording this, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to clearly see the slides there.
Correct. Yes. Good point. So where do timber rattlesnakes occur in Pennsylvania? This is a map of the historic range of timber rattlesnakes in Pennsylvania. And one of the things that is very important for conserving different species of animals is to know where they are out in nature and how many of them there are. And unfortunately, for a lot of organisms, we just don't have that information. We really don't know where things are, how many there are, unless there are people out there looking for them and reporting back and keeping track of data very carefully in a scientific way. And so when people started to become concerned about non-game organisms in Pennsylvania and what their distribution was, and are any of them in danger of being lost, and some of this started like back in the 60s and 1970s, people began to become concerned about things other than, the table animals like deer and things that you eat, right? Things that are game animals. And so what they realized, and it actually took them a while to realize this, is that you can't know where organisms are or how many there are unless somebody goes out and looks and reports back. And that activity has to be done all the time. It has to be done repeatedly because organisms change in numbers and locations. So if you're not out there monitoring them regularly, things can slip away. Things have slipped away and disappeared on us and gone extinct before we even knew there was any problem with them. And so conservation today and wildlife biology today is very concerned with programs for collecting data and monitoring organisms so that we have a heads up when things start to go south, when animals start to get in trouble, or even plants. You just really need to know ahead of time before they're actually gone that maybe we can do something if we act soon enough. And so one of the first programs for conserving timber rattlesnakes in Pennsylvania was a program that was designed to have volunteers go out and look for them in parts of their known range where they have been known to occur, and then to find them in areas where perhaps they have not been reported before. So there was this project, and we'll talk about that in some more detail a little bit later. But what you can see in the map, if you can see the map, is that timber rattlesnakes occur in a large section of Pennsylvania. Much of the state is part of their historical range. They do tend to be habitat specialists, and so you won't just see them if you go for a walk in the woods unless you're in just the right areas at just the right time. They're also secretive, so they spend a lot of time underground in crevices and in other places under big rocks where predators can't get at them. Even though they're venomous, they are susceptible to predation. Okay, so in the northern part of their range, as I mentioned, timber rattlesnakes are habitat specialists. And so they have a fairly strong affinity for certain types of habitat, but the habitats that they need change throughout the year. They don't always stay in the same place. And so the annual cycle has a big impact on just where the snakes are at any given time. In the in most of the year, timber rattlesnakes have a strong affinity for fairly rocky habitats, habitats that have strong recesses, crevices, and things like that that they can take shelter in, get out of view from predators, and many of the snakes do the same type of behavior. But rattlesnakes, because of their large size, have special needs for raising their body temperature up so that they can be active. So like most reptiles, they do like to have a high body temperature, just like we do, in order to go about their daily business. But they don't have the ability to generate that heat internally the way we do, the way you're doing right now. So you can sit on these benches and be inactive, generate enough heat, and with clothing on, you know, it helps to keep the heat in. Rattlesnakes don't have that advantage. They have to get all of their heat from outside of their body. So that means that, like many reptiles, timber rattlesnakes like to get out and get some sunshine. They like to take in the heat, and they have ways of, once they've taken that heat in, of keeping it internally as long as possible. But then when nighttime comes, their body temperatures cool down, and they have to find shelter because an inactive snake that can't defend itself because its body is cool is vulnerable. So, like most snakes, they will then find a crevice in the rock. And what you see in this picture is that there's, oops, sorry about that. There's a timber rattlesnake right there, and he's right in front of, or she is right in front of the little shelter area. And if the predator comes along, she can quickly slide in, out of sight, and be safe from that predator. Timber rattlesnakes use their heat-sensitive facial kits to observe the environment and find areas where that are thermally favorable for them to stay warm. And so we believe that this is a secondary use of the thermal heat pits in their face. It's to look around, find a place, oh, it's warmer over there, so I'm going to go over there and I'm going to sit in the sun until the sun is no longer available. They tend to prefer stones that make a recess underneath. Often a large slab rock is favored by them. And then they like to have an area that faces toward the sun, where the sun can reflect off of the surface of the rock and down onto the area where the snake is. That helps to concentrate heat even more than if you're just sitting on top of the rock in the sun. So it's kind of like a convection oven that uses the sun to cook meat, right? It comes down, there's a mirror that reflects the light down, and then the light concentrates in a particular spot. You get light coming directly onto the snake, and reflected light also warming up the snake. And so that creates the best situation for them. And then again, they like to have a crevice where they can dash into it if the need arises. Okay, let's move on. Some of the characteristics of timber rattlesnakes. So as I mentioned, fairly large snakes. The largest timber rattlesnake on record was 74.5 inches long, but that's a relative giant compared to most individuals. The weight of large snakes of that size can be up to 5.5 pounds or more, so it's a relatively heavy-bodied snake. Most snakes don't get near that weight. Few timber rattlesnakes even reach these sizes. So more typical sizes for timber rattlesnakes, a male timber rattlesnake above 50 inches would be considered a large male. And females often don't get much over about 40 inches. So 50 inches, 40 inches, and then a couple of pounds to 3. Sometimes we found individuals 4 pounds, but anything over that is an exceptionally large individual. Males are larger than females, so there is sexual dimorphism in this species in which males tend to be larger, females tend to be smaller. And we find this frequently in various reptiles where males are larger in species where there is male-to-male combat and competition for mates. And so in that case, a larger male will be more successful in getting mates than a smaller male. And you tend to find that those species where that happens have large males. But in species of reptiles where it's more important to have lots of babies and where the males don't actually wrestle with one another aggressively for the right to mate with a female, then in those species we find females tend to be larger. So garter snakes and water snakes have large females and small males. But timber rattlesnakes have large males, and the same is true with copperheads and most other pit vipers, because timber rattlesnake males will guard a female and try to prevent other males from mating with her by wrestling with that male. So if a male has a mate and another male comes up, that male will move forward and challenge him, and then they'll wrestle. And timber rattlesnakes, because they're venomous and they have very potent venom, if they bit each other, it can be quite fatal. So pretty soon, if that was the case, your timber rattlesnake population would disappear. So they don't bite one another when they're competing for mates. Instead, they do a process that's basically a wrestling match. Timber rattlesnake males will entwine with one another, and then one male tries to push the other one down with his anterior part of his body. And so after they wrestle this way over and over again, sometimes wrestling matches will go on for more than an hour. One of the snakes will usually give up and crawl away, and then the other male, claims victory and stays with the female. So that's one of the characteristics of timber rattlesnakes that affects their biology quite a bit. We also find that timber rattlesnakes come in two distinct color patterns. And so there are some individuals that have a lot of dark pigments in their skin. And so we typically refer to these as black-phase snakes or dark-phase snakes. And these snakes can sometimes be jet black. I think I have a picture of one in the next slide. So here's a female that is all jet black with no pattern visible on her. And I'm sorry you can't see that very well, but she's there, take my word for it. And so that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is individuals that have very little dark pigment. And we call these yellow-faced snakes because their predominant color is a bright, sometimes it can be a very bright yellow color. Typically, most snakes are somewhere in between. And even dark-faced snakes, even black snakes, sometimes have pattern. And here you can see this individual has dark blotches surrounded by yellow lines, and then most of the body is also a dark color. So dark individuals sometimes do show pattern. You find some that are sort of brown, intermediate. It's a little hard to tell. Oh, is that a black phase? Is that a yellow phase? And then often we use the color on top of the head to assign them to a color group. So you might have a brown snake, and when you look at the back end of the body, it gets darker and almost black. But the top of the head, if it's yellowish or kind of a brownish color, then we call it a yellow phase. If it's gray or black, then we call it a black phase. Also look in the eyes, and you'll see that the pigment of the iris of the eyes will be either a darker color or a more pale yellowy color. The tail, however, is always a dark black color, solid black, except in individuals that have an unusual color aberration. But this is one of the species of rattlesnakes where the tail is generally all one solid color, black. So people have used the name velvet tail to refer to them. Some of the old snake hunters call timber rattlesnakes old velvet tail. The length of the tail is greater in males than it is in females, and so this is a characteristic that you can use to tell what gender an individual is, and we use this typically in the field as well. So males have a longer tail. In adults, it's typically 7% of the body length or more, and in females, it's typically 6% or less. But the relative length of the tail does change a little bit as the snakes grow. So it's more pronounced in adults than in the young. If you look at the bottom of the tail, you'll see that it has a series of wide scales on the bottom of the tail, just like the belly does. The number of scales on the bottom of the tail is also sexually dimorphic. Males have more than females, and the number of subcaudal scales does not change as the snake grows. So you can even use that to assign a snake to a gender category, even when it's a newborn snake. Males typically have 21 or more subcaudal scales, and females typically have 22 or less. Very few female snakes have 21 or more scales. So usually they use that as a cutoff for saying, hey, this is probably a female or that's probably a male. Whether it has 21 or more or 20 or fewer. subcaudal scales. Let's talk about the diet of timber rattlesnakes for a few minutes. Timber rattlesnakes are considered to be mammal specialists. So snakes have a wide variety of different types of things that they can eat, but many groups of snakes, many species, are specialized on a much narrower range of organisms as their food. And timber rattlesnakes, by and large, eat mostly mammals. So they like to eat mice, and one of the most common elements in the diet of a timber rattlesnake would be the little white-footed mice that we find all over the forest here. You'll see them in your cupboards, in your house, in your garage, getting into the dog food if they can. That's one of the most commonly eaten things by timber rattlesnakes. They also like chipmunks and small squirrels of that sort. But the bigger timber rattlesnakes can eat fairly large mammals compared to their size. And so some of them will take gray squirrels. Gray squirrel is always a big meal for a timber. Some of them can even take rabbits, especially younger rabbits, often wind up in the diet of timbers. And so, especially the big, the really big ones. Shrews and things like that, occasionally, and other types of less common mice wind up in their diet as well. This is just a picture of a chipmunk. He's right in that sunspot there. Okay, so there are some, occasionally timber rattlesnakes will take a bird or even a reptile, but records of those things are relatively uncommon, relatively rare. Most timber rattlesnakes go through their entire life without eating a single bird or reptile of any kind. All right. So moving on, the picture of a timber rattlesnake in the rocks. And so let's talk about the pattern of life in a timber rattlesnake. Certain times of year, they will be found in rocky areas where sunshine warms up the rocks and can also warm up the snakes very effectively. And so they'll bask, especially in the cooler parts of the season when they're active. In the springtime and in the fall, often they accumulate in these rocky areas and will bask in the sun in order to raise their bodies up to an optimal temperature for at least part of each day. And then, they'll crawl back into the crevices at night. So these are times of the year when groups of snakes can be found. And this is very interesting for us because we are interested in monitoring timber rattlesnake populations. And the best way to monitor them is to find populations when they come together so that you can count individuals and see, how's the population doing this year? But then, as summer temperatures increase and things warm up, these timber rattlesnakes will disperse from their basking areas and go off into the forest to hunt. So timber rattlesnakes truly are forest snakes. They do most of their hunting out in the forest, and that's where they get the name timber rattlesnake, because they live in the timber, right? Sometimes they'll move out into a field if it is occupied by certain types of mice that they like, or chipmunks or ground squirrels. But they're never too terribly far from forested habitat. That's their natural habitat. And then they like forests that have lots of exposed rock. And you can see if you walk around Hawk Mountain, this is an ideal situation for them. And they do occur here, of course. One of the things that timber rattlesnakes need warm habitat for is gestating their young. So again, they cannot raise their body temperatures by using their own physiology like mammals can. And in order for their babies to develop inside of mom, she has to find a warm area where she can bask consistently throughout the summer months. Mother timber rattlesnakes will usually not travel very far from their wintering dens, their overwintering dens. And they will spend time basking in the sun almost exclusively all through the summer months until they give birth. They will usually forego feeding completely for the entire year until after the babies have been born. And so this is a period of 2 to 3 months during the summer when they're doing nothing except for making sure that their babies are warm enough, gestating those babies so that they can be born, and then typically the babies are born in late August or early September in our area, and then mom stays with the babies for another week to 10 days, or even longer, and she will provide some protection for them as they enter into the world and start to get used to, their habitat. It's only after that period when the babies begin to disperse, and they won't disperse until they shed their skin for the first time. Usually 7 to 10 days after birth, the babies shed, and then they are free to go, and then moms will also go. And the first thing the mom needs to do is find a mouse or a squirrel or something that she can eat, put some weight back on. She will put almost all of her available tissues, she will convert them into fat to help provide the yolk for the eggs that the babies eat. So they do have yolk inside, and eggs inside, and that yolk is used to nourish the babies. In part, they also get some nourishment from the mother's bloodstream, but they need to acquire a lot of this body weight, and then most of their body weight is converted to offspring, to yolk, and then to offspring. So once they give birth, babies come out, the mothers look absolutely emaciated. You can see their ribs, you can see their backbone, they look pathetic. You just want to like bring mice and here, have some mice, quick. Well, maybe you don't, but I do anyway. So yeah, they need to get that meal in order to safely make it through the winter, because obviously when they go into hibernation for the winter, when they brumate, they cannot feed them either. So they have to have plenty of fat reserves before they can actually give birth. Let's move on to the next slide. So some of these differences between different timber rattlesnakes will generate differences in their behavior. The whole population of timber rattlesnakes will stay in a wintering den, and they are not reptiles that can tolerate freezing weather. Some reptiles can tolerate freezing weather a little bit. Timber rattlesnakes cannot. They actually need to get down below the frost line in order to survive the winter. So this is one of the habitat requirements that they have. They have to have a deep den, and they have to have access to that den. And hopefully predatory animals that would eat them will not have access to that den. So you need a small den opening and a large space inside that can fit a whole population. And so usually mountainous areas are favorable for this. In the springtime, they come out, and as soon as the weather is warm enough, typically in early May, even as early as late April, they'll come out and bask in the sun near the den, and then go back in at night when it starts to get cold again. But interestingly, timber rattlesnakes tend to bask socially, which means that often early in this summer or late in the spring, you will literally find piles of timber rattlesnakes all entwined with one another in a ball and sitting in the sun. And this feature helps them to conserve heat. So once the heat comes in or warms up the snake, snakes have long, thin bodies, which means that the heat's going to go right back out again as soon as the heat source is removed. And so they can conserve heat by piling up together, and so a bunch of snakes has a greater mass and a smaller surface area, and so they can save that heat longer during the day. So if a cloud comes over the sun, or when the sun goes down, they'll stay warmer a little longer, and that's very beneficial for all of the snakes involved. So they do that, what's called social basking, and that's characteristic of their springtime behavior. Often, social basking locations are close to the den, but not always real close, and so you don't always know where the den is just because you stumbled across a group of basking timber rattlesnakes. But often, you can generally tell it's probably not going to be too far away from these sites. And the preferred sites are, again, sites where there's a rock that has a surface that faces the sun and a space below it where the rock can reflect that light down onto the snake, so it intensifies the amount of light available. And then usually there will be a crevice underneath that the snakes can slide into if there's any danger that comes by. The thing is, though, that when you have a big pile of timber rattlesnakes like that, you're probably a lot more safe than when you're a single snake off by itself, right? So a potential predator would come by, see a big pile of timber rattlesnakes all shaking their tails and rattling, and that would probably scare away a lot of predators that would otherwise attack a single snake. Once the spring advances a little bit, what happens is typically the males and the non-gravid females, females that are not going to give birth that year, will move off and move into their hunting ranges, while the gravid females will usually stay pretty close to the den and continue to bask through the summer. Sometimes the gravid females have preferred gravid female basking sites that they move to and stay there for the whole summer. These will usually be areas with a lot of openness overhead, rocks to absorb heat, and then you know, like a clearing in the forest where they'll get reliable sunshine. So those are some of the differences. Males and non-gravid females move off. Gravid females stay to incubate the babies, and generally don't move very far from the den site. So you may be able to see this a little better now that the sun is going down a little bit, but here's a pile of timber rattlesnakes. This is 15 snakes all bunched up together in front of a rock. So this rock is reflecting sun down here, and the sun is off in that direction. And they're all adult snakes. There aren't any young or juveniles in there. And they'll stay in that little ball of snakes until, you know, throughout most of the day, as long as the sun is out. And then they'll reassemble there the next day. And usually, they'll stay in these little groups for as much as a month in the early part of the year before dispersing. Males will disperse earlier, non-gravid females will disperse later, and then the gravids will often move off to a gravid female incubating site. And I get to set all of that. Yeah. Okay, and so, yeah, I think I said all that too. Let's just move on to the next slide. When adult snakes are moving around in their habitat during the summertime, doing their feeding, they typically will follow a pattern through their habitat, which may be as much as a couple of miles across. So they emerge from the spring from their den, they do their communal basking nearby, and then when they leave the area, male will usually follow a pattern, go to an area that's favorable for hunting, stay there for a few days, maybe a week, and then they'll move on a little farther, stay there a few days, maybe a week, move on, and they have areas that they tend to hit basically the same area at about the same time of year every year. And so when people have put transmitters into these snakes and followed them around, they find, oh, the male goes here, then he goes there, then he goes there, moves up. He's going to do mate searching and look for females somewhere far away from his den. And then, oh shoot, that's the wrong button, sorry. And then what he's going to do is come back. He's going to come back to the den. Usually they make a long distance run back to the den when the temperatures get to be about what they are today. So right now, timber rattlesnakes will probably be moving toward the den using this cold weather as a cue. And then the following year, they'll come out and they'll follow the same pattern over again. They have familiar haunts that they like to go to. Often these are associated with places where they caught a mouse or a squirrel the year before or during some year. And so they have a regular pattern to their movement. Gravid or non-gravid females will also follow a route like that, but it'll be a little shorter than the male. Gravid females don't do mate searching. They're the ones that the males are searching for, right? So usually what happens is a male emerges from his den, right? And when we look at the social structure of a given den, a given hibernation site, we find that most of the snakes in the den are related to one another. And so there's a reason for that. Those snakes that give birth, right, are close to their den, and then the babies will follow the moms back to the den. Even after the mom has left, babies will search around until they find her trail. They're very good at picking up odors off the ground, and so they'll trail their mothers back to the den. Or they might find a relative, you know, they might find an aunt or an uncle or a grandma and trail them back for the den. And usually they'll run across a snake that is from the den, same den that their mom is from, because they're close to that den. So they wind up finding their way to the den, and that's how they get into the den. And then you wind up with these colonies in a den that are mostly closely related individuals, right? So they're all relatives of one another. So when the males are out in the summertime, they go to the farthest extent of their travels, and that's when and where they typically are stimulated to look for females. That's their breeding time. They want to find a mate, and so it's good that they're searching far from the den, because now they're more likely to find unrelated females as mates, so you'll get gene exchange between populations rather than inbreeding within populations. So that's one of the characteristics of timber rattlesnakes that has made them successful, evolutionary successful. There's some other interesting features of the biology of timber rattlesnakes that I've already alluded to a little bit, and that is that not only do they tend to associate with members of their own kin groups because they're nearby and they're in the same den, but it's pretty clear from studies of genetics of timber rattlesnake groups that they have a strong preference for basking with their relatives. And so if you find piles of basking snakes in a given area, there's a pile over here, and there's a pile over here, you take blood samples from those snakes, you have to catch them and take samples, right? And then you analyze the samples, you find that these snakes tend to have a fairly strong preference for basking in a pile with other members of their own family group. And so when people have done this, even by taking snakes into captivity and then watching what happens when the snakes go to basking, you'll find that snakes will intertwine with other members of the group in their cage, but the members that they intertwine with are usually a sister or a brother or a cousin, an aunt or an uncle, and then members of other kin groups will associate in a different pile. So they definitely have a strong preference for individuals, other individual snakes that have a similar odor to themselves, and indicates that they have this genetic relationship with those individuals. And this is one of the reasons why we refer to these snakes as social animals. They're social because they like to associate with one another, but they also prefer associating with members of their relatively close kin group. So timber rattlesnakes give birth to relatively few offspring at a time, especially when you compare them with other snakes. A lot of snakes can give birth to 20, 30, 40 babies at a time, or lay 20 or 30 eggs. But timber rattlesnakes have an average clutch size, an average group of babies that's no more than 8. So 8 is the average. You can have more than 8 or fewer than 8, but 8 is the typical average. It's a rather small group of babies. This is because they provide the babies with so much nourishment and protection, right? Internal development throughout the baby's prenatal time, and then the mothers stay with the young, provide them with a little bit of protection. The young are easily able to find a den by tracking local snakes, especially quickly they track their own mom back to the den. And so there's a lot of factors that benefit these snakes in their behavior and in their biology. And so that also, however, makes them vulnerable as a population. They don't reproduce very often. Also, they don't begin to reproduce until often there are 5, 6, 7, even 8 years of age. Especially females won't begin giving birth until they're older, often 7 or 8 years of age before they have their first batch of young. And that means that the rattlesnake populations tend to be rather vulnerable if anything is going wrong. So if there are predators or diseases, if people are coming around and whacking them on the head, then their populations tend to drop off quickly, and it takes a long time for them to build back up. And so for that reason alone, timber rattlesnakes are of great concern as a species for conservation in Pennsylvania. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some efforts that have gone on regarding timber rattlesnake conservation, especially here in our home state, Pennsylvania. And I think I hit that button. Oh, sorry. Well, this is a species that has been of great concern, and what conservationists in Pennsylvania have learned is that timber rattlesnakes are in severe decline in almost all of the states that border us. So all the states in the Northeast, east of us, west of us, timber rattlesnake populations are disappearing. And this is partly because timber rattlesnakes tend to have a bad reputation, and people don't like having them around. And so a lot of people will go around killing them, disrupting their hibernation dens and so on. So in many places, we've seen declines. And so when people started wondering how timber rattlesnakes are doing in Pennsylvania, and a little bit of alarm was growing because, oh, you know, everybody else is losing their snakes. We don't know what's going on in Pennsylvania. And so they started a project where they used volunteer snake hunters, and a lot of these people were actually recruited from among the snake hunters that have existed here in Pennsylvania for over 100 years. And they were happy to come on board and help us to figure out what was going on. And so what they did was they started a project that they called the Timber Rattlesnake Assessment Project, which was TRAP for short. And then these folks went around and tried to document whether there were still snakes occurring at existing historically known den sites, right, or activity sites. And so wherever people had reported timber rattlesnakes in the past, they went back and tried to find them. And then they said, yes, there are snakes here, made a little count and so forth, put it down on the map. And then they also started looking for other populations, new populations that were unknown to the state, and putting those dots on the map as well. And so at that time, they had put the timber rattlesnake provisionally, they considered it to be a candidate, what's called a candidate species. Because it was known to be in decline in neighboring states, they decided, well, in Pennsylvania, it might be in decline, so we're going to find out. And if it is in decline, then we're going to put it on the endangered species, sort of threatened list, depending on how bad things are. And so that's what a candidate species is. It's an official listing. Well, lo and behold, the TRAP project showed that timber rattlesnakes are still fairly widespread in Pennsylvania. We still have some fairly large populations as well. They were able to survey, in the first 10 years, they surveyed over 2,000 sites. And of the sites surveyed, 1,700 of the sites still had, or more than 1,700 sites still had timber rattlesnakes, active populations. And so they're still widespread, and they're still fairly numerous in the state. There are some issues, though, as you'll see, that are facing the timber rattlesnakes now. We'll talk about those shortly. One of the benefits of the TRAP project was that it was one of these projects that was manned by, they used the power of volunteers. So there were a lot of volunteers involved in the project. The project was statewide. It was run by this fellow here in the picture. This is Jim Chesney. He was a well-known snake hunter back in the day, and he happened to have a lot of friends, and they organized this big project along with the Fish and Boat Commission. So Fish and Boat Commission, that area that's concerned with reptiles and endangered species, is that is coordinated and run by a fellow named Chris Irvin. So Chris Irvin runs that section, and he was the one that initiated this project, found some funding for it, and got it off the ground. And what they found was that, yeah, timber rattlesnakes are still doing pretty well here. And so the snake actually had to be removed from the candidate list. So it's no longer considered a candidate species. It's considered to be secure in Pennsylvania. But because of its biology, it's a species that is somewhat vulnerable to various potential problems in forms of exploitation as well. Okay. So the TRAP project, Timber Rattlesnake Assessment Project, went on for 10 years, and then it's beginning to draw to a close. And at that point, they decided that what was needed was not finding more populations of timber rattlesnakes, but keeping track of the populations that we know of. and developing a way of monitoring those populations to make sure that they don't start to go into any kind of a rapid decline or get into any danger. And so that gave rise to a second project, and that's the one that I am responsible for. That one is called the Tundra Rattlesnake Monitoring Project, and we use the acronym TRAMP for it because if you say Tundra Rattlesnake Monitoring Project, it basically comes out TRAMP, right? Also, we do tramp over forests and fields. We walk miles and miles to find our rattlesnakes, so I think it's also an appropriate name for that reason. It picks up from the TRAP project by taking those populations that were identified and sending people out to do annual counts. So the idea is that we will look at the best time. We'll try to establish what the best time is to go out and see the maximum number of rattlesnakes. They do counts, and then by comparing those counts with known population sizes where we do mark and recapture studies, we can estimate what that means to see so many rattlesnakes on a given day. So the main purpose of this TRAMP study is to establish a scientifically based monitoring method that can be used to check the status of Tundra rattlesnakes throughout the state. There were a number of different features that were molded into the project. It used previously established work from the original TRAP project. It used citizen science. Again, we use volunteers from throughout the state to go out and do counting. And then we invite established and experienced timber rattlesnake volunteers to be participants in the project. We design a program that requires relatively little financial investment, and it's mostly based on the interest of the citizens of the state to help maintain and keep it running. And so those are the characteristics of our project, the TRAMP project, the monitoring project. So we established a two-pronged approach to this. We are organizing teams of volunteers around the state to go out and look for timber rattlesnakes. Each team will be responsible for a given region, and they'll go out and look at different dens in their region in different years, and provide counts of individuals. We also use GIS and satellite imagery to look at habitat features from these satellite generated photos, and use those images to track whether habitats seem to be degrading substantially in a given area or not. This is one of our teams, by the way. You can see over here, maybe you can't see, but this is a group of people, including one of my graduate students, Tiana Johnson, who's here in the audience. And she organized a group out in the western part of Pennsylvania, and they are currently working with populations out there. We have a group in the east, groups in the north central, and so on and so forth. And they are basically doing a lot of pit tagging at the moment. We're looking at population sizes and then comparing our known population sizes or estimated population sizes to the number of snakes seen on a given day and on given weather conditions. So we have this process of monitoring, which involves pit tagging to determine actual population sizes. And then the rapid assessment is the process that will, after our project is done, which is basically at the end of this year, then we will carry forward just doing this rapid assessment process where people are going to go out, count rattlesnakes, count what they see, and then compare that with expected population sizes based on our pit tagging. So we need a well-designed model of seasonal snake activities times and when we expect the snakes to be in given locations in large numbers, and those are the areas that we will check. The pit tagging process requires us to capture snakes, and then we put a little pit tag inside of the snake. It's the same type of a tag that you would put inside your pet cat or dog at the veterinarian's office. And if your cat or dog gets lost, they can identify it using that tag. It has a unique number. It comes up, when you pass the reader over the tag, got a little coil inside it that resonates at a given frequency. And so each tag is unique, and you can use it to identify individuals. So we do that too in order to do our mark recapture. So we capture snakes, we put the tag inside with a little needle, and then we release the snake, and then we come back the next year and try to catch a bunch of snakes. And some of those snakes will be recaptures that will already have a tag inside, and we can read it and identify them. That allows us to estimate population sizes with some accuracy. And then that will allow us to compare our results of simply doing visual scans and come up with a way to estimate population sizes doing that. So there's a snake in a tube. You can see the tube, and the snake's head is right there. And that's two of my graduate students, John and Eric, who are, they both actually graduated and moved off. The other component, the geospatial component that I mentioned before, is this analysis using satellite-generated imagery. I'm just going to go through this quickly to show you, in essence, how it works. We can look at areas where snake populations existed in the past, and we can use historical satellite imagery. So here's an image of a part of the Poconos from 1992. You can see back then they were all in black and white. And it's hard to see it with the light on the screen, but basically what you see here is modern roads shown as lines, white and yellow lines. And then you can kind of see where the old roads that existed at that time were present. Over here we see some houses, a little development, a little housing development. But over in this side we see, oh, it's all forest and open lands and a few little dirt roads traversing it. And we compare that to an image from 2015. We see, oh, look, this is all full of housing developments now. And the overall image has changed quite a bit in its appearance. And so what might once have had habitat that timber rattlesnakes could use is now mostly housing developments. They would not be able to live there. Most people would not tolerate the proximity of any large population. And so what we do is we look at these different images and we can use them to monitor how much habitat degradation, the density of roads, the density of buildings, so on and so forth, that might have negative impacts on timber rattlesnake populations. And we can use that to figure out where we should concentrate our efforts with doing these surveys, timber rattlesnake surveys in the future. Okay, so that's basically how that timber rattlesnake monitoring process is going on. We would like to be able to quantitatively assign a threat level to changes in the habitats. So we can look at a habitat, look at how much change has occurred, and then quantitatively estimate, oh, how bad is that for timber rattlesnake populations? And then we can send our teams into the areas where the most degradation has occurred. There are a couple of other issues that are coming up with timber rattlesnakes, causing problems for them. One of them is a new disease that has been recently described and seems to be traveling through a lot of different species of snakes, but mostly it's having its impact on pit vipers like timber rattlesnakes and the Massacre rattlesnake. Snake fungal disease is a fungus that infects the skin of the snake, typically starts on the face, enters around the eyes or the nostrils or the pit organ, and causes the skin to become basically eaten away by the fungus. The fungus, if it gets bad enough, can enter into muscle tissue and destroy both muscle and even bone. They find that the fungus can destroy bone. It is fatal in a high percentage of cases in some species of snakes, like the Massacre. Timber rattlesnakes appear to be a little more resistant to this disease, but it appears that the disease has become much more widespread in recent years, and that correlates very strongly with an increased interest in snakes among amateur herpetologists, people who like to go out and catch snakes. And if you look on the internet, you'll see no end of images of people, yeah, I found timber rattlesnakes in Pennsylvania, and they have one in their hands, or they've got one on a hook. It turns out that we think that this fungal disease is probably spread largely by people using their hook on snakes that are infected, and then going to another den, 20 miles away, hooking more snakes, and then spreading the disease into that population. And it appears to be real prevalent now. One of the aspects of the monitoring project was to look at how widespread the fungal disease is, and we found that all of the populations that we sampled in eastern and central Pennsylvania have this fungal disease. Once the snakes get it, they carry it on their skin down into the dens and infect other snakes, and that becomes more widespread in the population. It causes scarring and tissue damage in timber rattlesnakes. In some individuals, it is fatal. So we have found individuals that have been near death, and by watching them over time, sometimes people have said, oh yeah, I came back and that snake was dead after a period, and it appears to die of this fungal disease. In the image here, if you could see it, you'd see that here's a snake whose face is all crusty and scabbed over. The pit organ that it uses to find prey is completely absent. It's obliterated in this poor individual. This snake was, this particular snake was gasping for breath. It wasn't able to breathe through its nose with its mouth closed. So we're pretty sure that this was a snake that was probably going to die. Most snakes seem to be able to recover, but they do suffer from scarring to their sensory organs, scars around the eyes, scars around the pits and the nose. And so it is something that is of concern. I think it's something that we will need to follow fairly closely in the future. Another problem that we're encountering is poaching. So this increase of interest in timber rattlesnakes and other venomous species also goes along with an increase in the interest of people in keeping pet snakes. They especially like to have exotic or unusual snakes. And so timber rattlesnakes are high on the list of many people who like to keep these animals. So it turns out that there's a fairly widespread black market in timber rattlesnakes in Pennsylvania and other places where they're fairly common. Also, some people just want to come in and catch snakes and take pictures of themselves holding snakes over and over again. And this seems to be a form of, basically it's like harassing the poor critters, and they don't get any rest, they don't get any peace. And so this also has a negative impact, and especially it can spread this disease around. So poaching is a problem that the Fish and Boat Commission is very concerned about, and they are keeping track of what goes on, and they are making some arrests. And they caught people having as many as 100 timber rattlesnakes in their possession at once. They're obviously dealers who intend to sell them, and that is illegal within the state. On the bright side, we have other efforts to conserve timber rattlesnakes. Other organizations are paying a lot of attention to them. Hawk Mountain is a perfect example of that. Hawk Mountain is one of those preserves that is very concerned about their stewardship of wild plant and animal populations. And so they invite scientists to come in and work their studies at their sites. And so that's one of the reasons that we were here. That was the first reason that we were actually invited to come to Hawk Mountain and include their population in our study of timber rattlesnake monitoring, to develop monitoring techniques. And so we came here. Timber rattlesnakes, of course, are fairly common at Hawk Mountain. And in fact, what you may not know is that Hawk Mountain is a rather famous site among herpetologists. People who study snakes all over the country know about Hawk Mountain because this is one of the first places where snakes were implanted with radio transmitters and followed. People put transmitters inside of snakes surgically, and then they follow them around with a little receiver and an antenna. And they can see where the snakes go, and that's how we know that these snakes travel around and do their thing in a specific way. And so Howard Reinert was the person who actually established the technique. He and David Kundal at Lehigh University established the technique for surgically implanting the transmitters. And they also then did studies here at Hawk Mountain. And so there are a couple of studies published, I think back in 1984, by Howard Reinert on timber rattlesnake behavior. He actually compared rattlesnakes and copperheads to see how they differed ecologically. So we are going back to using radio telemetry here at Hawk Mountain. There's Lewis Wolf, one of my graduate students currently, and he is tracking snakes at Hawk Mountain presently. And he is looking at, among other things, where the dens are. So this is very valuable information for a group like the folks here at Hawk Mountain who are interested in conserving timber rattlesnakes in a place where they also have a lot of people hiking on trails. So we're going to help them find out where the timber rattlesnakes' important congregating areas are, where their hibernation sites are, their den sites, and then Hawk Mountain can take appropriate actions to help keep the timber rattlesnakes and the people from accidentally running into each other unexpectedly, right? So maybe directing trails around those sites where the rattlesnakes are and so forth. In the future. We're also looking at the temperature, the behavior of how the temperature of the snake affects its behavior. So Lewis is also looking at those features so that that'll help us to determine when the optimal time is to go out and do a survey for snakes. We want to go out when the snakes are available and visible to us. And so by having detailed information on the behavior of snakes at different times of day, different angles of the sun, weather conditions, and so on, then Lewis can help us to figure out, okay, what is the optimal time to go out? So that all of those things are happening in the same study right here at Hawk Mountain. So there are a number of other places that have expressed interest in the timber rattlesnakes and conserving them in Pennsylvania. So we have actually had a surprising number of places invite us to come and look at their populations. And I think that is a very strong indication, a very positive thing for wildlife, that people are paying attention and making an effort to find out what's the best way to conserve these species. And that is, I think I'm going to end my talk here. I think I've gone over my time a little bit. I apologize for that, but thank you very much for your patience and your interest. I have here a rattle from a Hawk Mountain rattlesnake that we found out by the trail. And so if you want to see what a rattle looks like and what it's made of, I invite you to come up here. And I'll put my mask back on so that I can see from a distance. Anybody have any questions?
A couple of quick ones.
Sure.
First one is, do rattlesnakes ever mix it up with copperheads in their battles?
They generally don't. So usually the odor of the two species is different enough that they can tell the difference pretty quickly. And usually we don't see them so much right next to one another when they're basking, but we often see them like in the same rock outcrop. So there'll be 2 or 3 copperheads here and 2 or 3 rattlesnakes over there. Once in a while, they'll actually be right next to one another.
When they
And
eat
they don't seem to pay much attention.
when they eat larger animals like squirrel or something like that, I imagine they unhinge their jaw to do that and swallow them whole.
Yeah, so snakes, unlike other vertebrates, like mammals, reptiles, and so on, snakes are fairly unique in that the front of the jaw does not have a joint that connects the 2 bones together. Instead, they have stretchy ligaments there that allows them to stretch their jaws out like this. And so people refer to it as unhinging the jaw. But it's really just the ability to open the mouth really widely. You can imagine if this is the snake's upper jaw, this is its lower jaw, they can do this to encompass a huge prey item. And rattlesnakes are expert at that. All snakes can do it, but rattlesnakes have a particular capacity for opening their mouths very widely to swallow really large animals. As you can imagine, it's rather difficult to do if you don't have any arms to help shove things in it.
The last question is, they have an annual roundup up in Knoxville outside Wilkes-Barre below Tunkhannock.
That's correct.
Is that considered beneficial, harmful, or innocuous kind of?
It's a mix of the two. We're afraid that probably those kinds of snake roundups in the past have helped to spread this snake fungal disease. But one of the things that the Fish and Boat Commission did to help conserve rattlesnakes was they didn't want to shut down the roundups because they're very popular in those parts of the state where they occur. They help to generate income for towns out in the middle of the state and so forth. So they didn't want to shut them down. They didn't want to do something that would be very unpopular in those areas. So they allowed them to continue, but they said that the new rule was you have to put the snakes back. You bring snakes in, you can have your roundup, but then they're supposed to go right back to where you found them. And go to that,
Did he milk them?
familiar place.
Did he milk them?
They generally don't, no. So it's not really that helpful to get a lot more snake venom. A lot of antivenom now is generated in big institutes. They don't really need that much from wild snakes. But what they do is they measure them and they compare them, and then hopefully they take them back to where they found them. And so yeah, that has been allowed to continue. The positive aspect of that is that there's an educational component to it, and there's also a certain attachment to develop for these snakes. So instead of going out and hammering every snake they see into the dirt, they're like, oh yeah, timber rattlesnakes. I know about timber rattlesnakes, and so it develops a much more friendly relationship between snake populations and humans that live in the environment. You have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna say on that note of like, before people care about them, they need to know like, well, why are they beneficial, or why don't I have to be afraid of them? Like, what are some surprising? Like, I think I read that they help control tick populations.
Yes. So that is one of the things that people say. Oh, one of the reasons that Lyme disease became so widespread when it did is because of the drop in timber rattlesnake population. So timber rattlesnakes do not eat ticks, but they eat mammals. And it's the ticks that are found attached to the mammals that spread Lyme disease. And so when the snake eats a mouse, it also eats the ticks that are attached to that mouse. And so that helps to reduce not only the host of the tick that spreads the disease, which is the mouse, but also the vector, which is the tick. So both of those things are kept somewhat in check when timber rattlesnakes are allowed to flourish and feed out in the forest. And they think that if you go out into any Pennsylvania forest now and set traps for mice, live traps or whatever, you'll catch dozens and dozens and dozens of these white-footed mice. And they are specifically the ones that carry Lyme disease. They carry the tick and the intermediate stage of the disease. And so, part of that reason is that there are fewer predators, and white-footed mice are much more competitive. They're able to outcompete other types of mice and undergo these population explosions. In the fall, they're all coming into your house and helping themselves to the dog food and the bird seed and whatever else you store inside of anything that can be chewed through. And that's partly because, there's just fewer predators, and one of the main predators in Pennsylvania had been historically the timber rattlesnake. We still have good timber rattlesnake populations in many areas, but it's true that in some areas there have been severe declines, and even absence of timber rattlesnakes.
How long do they typically live?
Typically, they live for about 20 to 25 years. The oldest known record was 30 years. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the social basking of familial groups.
Yes.
Do you think that's possibly an inclusive fitness benefit to these snakes? Yes. I don't know if it's like quite evidence of kin selection, but is there anything on that front?
So it's thought that snakes derive benefit from basking together because a large group of snakes is less vulnerable to predators than a single snake. And so it's probably good to bask together with other individuals. And if you are using your presence to help augment the pile of other snakes, it's just naturally going to be beneficial to your genes if some of those snakes share your genes.
Yeah.
So it's better for you to find a group of related snakes and bask with them in terms of providing protection for your own, filial genes than to bask with a bunch of strangers and provide protection to somebody else who's basically a competitor to your family.
I have one more question.
Yes.
So with your RFID stuff, have you ever tried to use readers at some of the potential den sites to keep track of individuals that are coming in and out?
Nobody has done that to my knowledge, but that is something that I have thought of, and I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah.
And so one thing that people do is to set up trail cameras. If you have a small den opening, you can set a camera up on it, and you can actually see snakes coming out in your pictures. So we've done that before. That helps us a lot to figure out how many snakes are in a given den. But if you could also set up one of those readers on a little hoop that goes across the crevice, right? And snakes going in and coming out could be recording themselves. So that would also work. And I think that might be a way that will go in the future. Yeah. Definitely would like to try that. Yes.
What can we do as people to do to help like the timber rattlesnakes and snakes in general?
So one of the most beneficial things that you can do is talk to your friends and tell them about how timber rattlesnakes are interesting and an important part of the environment and how it's important to conserve them and generate just, you know, a certain amount of interest in the snakes. It also is something that citizens can do is participate in projects like the trap study and the tramp study where you help with monitoring. So if you want to be a project member, you can. It requires a certain amount of training and so forth. But you could go out and be one of the people who helps to count timber rattlesnakes. And then
I like big snakes, but it's weird because I'm okay with big snakes, but I have a huge phobia of tiny snakes.
oh, really? I've heard of that before, actually.
Yeah, I actually had a yellow, like a whitish and yellow ball-headed python. He was completely yellow and his stars were like white.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
I had to give him to like this zoo or this wildlife place because he was 6 foot. He was too big to be kept in captivity.
Yeah, they grow. Pythons get big.
Yeah,
That's for
when you
sure.
put weights at the top, they learn how to lift them up.
Yeah, they can do that. Snakes are experts at escaping, yes.
Hey, I just wanted to add a comment. Can people that also want to help, can they, if they see one in the wild when they're hiking or whatever, can they then submit that on PARS?
Yeah, so we have PARS in Pennsylvania, which is the Pennsylvania and Amphibian Pennsylvania Reptile and Amphibian. Sorry, no, Amphibian and Reptile Survey. PARS, right? Yeah, I got it. So that's another thing that we got started at ESEO Group with a nonprofit organization called Massacre, and we ask people if they see an amphibian or a reptile to try to get a picture of it and then send it in to this website, send the data in. And that is actually helping Pennsylvania a lot to establish locations and distributions of all amphibians and reptiles in Pennsylvania. And so that's the site where you should actually submit your information. That'll get to the Fish and Boat Commission, and they use that to determine which amphibians and reptiles in Pennsylvania are in danger, which ones need study, which ones are common and widespread. So that helps a lot if you can actually join PARS. It's free. You just go in and put in your email and establish an account, and then take your phone, your cell phone, and there's actually, I think, an app that they have where you can just take the picture, and if the picture has the locality, the longitude and latitude associated with it, then that goes right in, and you just add in a few notes about the weather and who you are and so on, and then the record goes into the Fish and Boat Commission. There are a lot of other sites where people like they like to have photos of animals and plants, amphibians and reptiles submitted, but it's more like just for fun, just to see, oh, this is what this person caught. And sometimes it has locality information associated with it, and that can be bad for animals like timber rattlesnakes that attract these commercial poachers who want to get snakes and sell them on the black market. So if you sell it to PARS, people can see the county where you saw the animal, but they cannot see any more detailed information than that. And so that's considered to be a fairly safe way to submit data. Other people can see what you submitted. They can see your photos of it, but they won't necessarily be able to go to the same site and find the same animal. Yes.
When you were talking earlier about how they'll go from the den to like a hunting area or even a field, how far will they travel? A mile?
So a male timber rattlesnake will typically travel 1 mile to 2 miles from its den during the summer. The extremes, some individual will go 3 or 4 miles away, but usually not much more than that. Usually it's like a mile or a little over a mile or less than that. Do you have a question? Yes.
Just on the basking together, maybe it was just coincidence. Make sure you were saying that these are all adults. Is that the way they do it? Where do if so, do the smaller ones pass together, or how does that?
Smaller ones occasionally will enter a group like that, but we don't tend to find very many of them there. I think, and this is just me speculating, but I think it's because smaller snakes are more able to raise their body temperature quickly. They have less mass, sit out in the sun, and they can warm up quickly. And then when the sun goes away, they will also cool off quickly. But I think that for them, there's a certain advantage to just warming up quickly, and they don't necessarily need to hang out with another group of snakes. Big snakes, it takes them a long time to accumulate the heat that's necessary to have the active metabolic level. And so once they've accumulated that heat, they want to hang on to it as long as they can, so they tend to pile up in these piles. I don't know if experience plays a role there too, where they actually have to learn this during the course of their life, or if they just do it instinctively. But it's pretty clear that they have that instinctive preference to hang out with their own family members. Other questions? Well, thank you so much. Yes, go ahead.
Just one on the colors.
Yeah.
Phases. Why color phases? Dietary, or why is it habitat? Why would there be difference?
So it just happens in some species of animals that you can have different types of pigment, different levels of pigment, and it's genetically determined. And in some groups, you get this sort of dichotomy where two types of pigment patterns are adaptively favorable. And so often you'll find that you'll get individuals, like for a timber rattlesnake clutch of babies, from the same mom, you can have yellow and black phase individuals in that clutch. So it's a fairly simple genetic relation, like red and black and brown hair, blonde hair, etc. In humans. So it's just a few genetic traits that influence the color pattern. Turns out that people think that, and there's some evidence to support this, the black color phase seems to be more adaptive in farther north and higher elevation populations where it's cooler, because black tends to, hold on to more heat. So less heat is reflected off and more is absorbed into the body. So it seems to be more prevalent in cooler habitats. If you go south, you'll find more of the yellow phase. Yellow phase seems to be much more adaptive for blending into leaf litter and things like that. Tan, yellowish colored things that fall to the ground. So they're very inconspicuous on the forest floor, whereas the black phase might be a little more conspicuous, but they have the thermal advantage of gaining heat quickly.
One snake I saw in the Lehigh Gorge, snake handlers had a tube, kind of like looked like a thin row of bluish scales along the bottom. I had never seen that before.
No, I'm not familiar with that either. Any bluish color in timber seems unusual to me. Yeah, so that must have been just an aberrant individual out of class, which does turn up sometimes. We found one individual that was amorphistic. It had no black coloration in it, but it did have sort of brownish tones and then yellow. And so it looks different from all the other. It didn't have the typical black tail. Instead, you could see that it had a pattern of darker and lighter rings on its tail, which is found in other species of rattlesnakes, but not in most timbers. So there are some individuals that have aberrant color patterns. Yes?
I was just curious about some of the forest management and how it might affect snakes, like forest burns that are found in the clear the understory, or even just clear cuts. I mean, what are the snakes' response?
So that's actually one of our next projects, is to look at the effects of doing controlled burns in Pennsylvania in timber rattlesnake habitat. Some people have been looking at that already, and it does appear that snakes actually will be killed by these controlled burns. But when they do the controlled burns, it creates an opening in the habitat, which is apparently beneficial. And what happens is snakes from surrounding forests will often come to those openings after the burn is done, and they'll use the forest edge as a good place to bask and to hunt for mice and so on. So it's one of those things where you have benefits and you have, negative, positive and a negative side to the whole issue. It might cause damage to individuals that are living where the burn is when the burn happens, but it seems to have the advantage of allowing populations to rapidly replenish and replace those individuals. And so generally the theory seems to be that by creating habitat diversity, the positives outweigh the negatives of losing some individuals during the fire. So better for the population, but bad for the individuals, obviously, that died in the fire, which you wouldn't wish on anybody, even animals.
Where do we go to volunteer?
You can contact me at East Stroudsburg. I don't have any cards with me. Maybe I could give you some information, or I have any in this. Yeah, I think I'm out, but yeah, let me, is there a way that we could,
If you need to,
I can shut this down and I'll write my email. How's that? I'll put my email up on the
let
screen.
me
and
break
you can
off
just
a piece of paper for you.
jot it down and take a picture.
Well, Dr. Leduc, thank you so much. This was fascinating. I personally learned so much and such fantastic questions from the audience. So
Yes,
thank
very
you.
good question. Thank you guys.
I have some questions in my email then.
Okay, you got it.
And thank you everyone for joining us. If you have seen our printed calendar events, there are some changes on the dates for some of the fall lecture series. They're all still on, but some of the presenters that live farther away are going to be doing them through Zoom webinars. So the dates are a little bit different. The next one is Thursday, October 8th. This is a Zoom webinar, Mountain Lions, Uncovering the Mystery.
Oh, nice.
On the next one is Saturday, October 17th, here at the amphitheater at 5. That's with our own Dr. J.F. Terrien, Climate Change and Impacts on Raptors. Then Saturday, October 24th is also going to be here at the amphitheater at 5:00 p.m. Project that Brianna has been working on, behavioral variation and hybridizing chickadees. And then the next one is a Zoom webinar on Thursday, October 29th. It's Team Warbler from Chesapeake to Panama. And then our last one is also a Zoom webinar on Thursday, November 19th. And it's the American Kestrel. So we hope to see you again soon. And thank you so much. Enjoy your Saturday evening. And thank you, Dr. Leduc.
Thank you.